to prove my sole title to the honor of being useful to my country, by a proof that I was not wholly unacquainted with its laws, and the whole system of its interests both abroad and at home. Otherwise, no rank, no toleration even, for me. Like many Irish couples of that time, the elder Burkes had entered into a mixed marriage, Edmund's father being a member of the Church of Ireland, an Anglican that is, and his mother a Catholic. With his two brothers, Edmund was reared as an Anglican, while his sister, Juliana, brought up in the old profession, remained all her life an ardent Catholic. One of Burke's chief endeavors in Parliament, half a century later, was to effect the amendment of the penal laws that weighed down Irish Catholics. Burke's early career was hampered somewhat by the suspicion of the Whig Duke of Newcastle and others that the rising young man was a secret papist, or even a Jesuit in disguise, and political caricaturists later sometimes draped him in a Jesuit habit. Despite these impediments, Edmund Burke was to become the most interesting of British political philosophers, one of the greatest of modern rhetoricians, the principal intellectual leader of the Whig party, and the most formidable opponent of the French Revolution and of armed doctrine generally. He drew up, in the phrase of Harold Laski, the permanent manual of political wisdom, without which statesmen are as sailors on an uncharted sea. Burke became a public man. Little mentioned in the many volumes of his letters, his private life is sufficiently obscure, for he labored incessantly as a practical politician, with slight leisure for epistolary pleasantries. Also, while very young, he remarked that it is well to tell the world no more of oneself than the world must know. The biographer, therefore, patches together as best he may the fragments which distinguish Burke the man from Burke the leader of party and Burke the philosopher. And it is, after all, the public Burke who matters. This short biography is chiefly an account, then, of a new man, who, by power of intellect and remarkable diligence, rose to distinction in his time and to influence long thereafter. Burke's private life, aside from the frustrated schemes of his kinsmen, was exemplary but unexciting. Burke's public life shows us the process by which, through experience of the world and through the life of the mind, an Irish writer and political partisan made of himself one of the wisest men ever to meditate upon the civil social order. As a practical politician, Burke did not succeed conspicuously. During the larger part of his career, he stood among the opposition, stood grandly but out of office. In the hour of his death, 1797, a terrible moment in the history of England and of Europe, as John Morley wrote, he beheld the triumph of his denunciations of the Revolution in France, but only a triumph of dubious battle. The passing of a mere half-century was to bring the Communist Manifesto, and from the day of his death onward, historians have recorded the effacing, in much of the world, of that order governed by what Burke described as the spirit of religion and the spirit of a gentleman. But Burke was more than a party leader and a man of his time. As the champion of what T.S. Eliot called the permanent things, Burke did not fail, nor is he archaic. He speaks to our age. Only 35 years ago, Burke was little more than recorded, respected, ignored. John Morley had predicted in 1888, it seems probable that he will be more frequently and more seriously referred to within the next 20 years than he has been within the whole of the last 80. This did not come to pass, not then. 25 years later, Paul Elmer More stated that Morley had been in error, and not until 1949 was a revival of strong interest in Burke discernible. In that year, a scholar of German upbringing remarked to this writer that among educated men in the United States existed a curious ignorance of Burke, who, with his power of style, the varied aspects of his genius, and the breadth of his intellect, might be supposed to attract the attention of those circles that pride themselves upon their grasp of modern thought. And my German friend attributed this condition to a vague popular impression that Burke had been wrong about France, and somehow was not quite the reading for a liberal. Just then, liberal was the word for conjurers in the American groves of academe. Yet by 1950, Mr. Lionel Trilling expressed doubts of the efficacy of liberal concepts, and Mr. Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr. confessed, "We find Burke more satisfying today than Paine, Hamilton or Adams than Jefferson, Calhoun than Clay or Webster." Since then, Burke has been rediscovered. A score of scholarly studies, some of them specialized, have dealt with him. Popularly and by politicians, he is mentioned and quoted more frequently than he had been in all the interval since 1832. We are even told of an eccentric in the Bowery passing out cards with the legend, "Burke saves." The rising generation, to which Burke appealed at the